welcome everyone to the Barry County Science Festival 2020. Our next presentation is Bringing Back the Monarchs, one milkweed at a time. It'll be presented this morning by Mike Klug of the Wild Ones Kalamazoo.
Okay, good morning everybody. As the title says, Bringing Back the Monarchs. The monarchs have been in trouble and declining populations for quite a number of years. And we belong to a group called Wild Ones. If you're not familiar with them, Wild Ones is actually a national organization based out of Wisconsin, which their mission is to foster the use of native plants in your landscape. You might say, well, why do we want native plants? Well, native plants were around a long time before we actually settled this area. And as a result of that, the insects and all the other animals that use those plants as a resource require native plants. They don't recognize the exotic ones from China and various places around the country that have been brought in and fostered in the nursery industries. So if you'd like to know more about native plants and also our organization, we have a website. Just search for Kalamazoo Area Chapter Wild Ones, and we have quite a bit of information on our Wild Ones page. Well, let's talk about monarchs. Well, first of all, let's sort of look at their annual cycle. So the areas in blue are the overwintering site for these animals. And so when we consider the fact that there are three populations of monarchs. One is the East Coast, and they sort of do their annual cycle from Florida in the winter and then gradually move up to the East Coast during the summer. The Midwestern, of course, occupies the greatest range in here. And this is the largest number of monarchs in the country. And the Pacific Coast is the summer in the west of the Rockies and winter on the coastline of California and upper Mexico. So this overwintering population, which is nearing that site as of now, will come back in the spring. One generation is formed in the spring, and then they move up where we can have up to 2 generations in the upper United States and lower ranges of Canada. Well, over the years, monarchs have been declining, as I mentioned, and one of the ways of measuring this decline is to look at the number of hectares of land which are occupied by the winter population. And you can see there's a great deal of fluctuation from year to year. We're trying to understand more about why that fluctuation occurs, but there certainly is a trend towards lower and lower populations. Last year was not a good year. The year before was actually a pretty good year, and then of course all of these lower years down in this particular way. So monarchs are not the only insect which is in trouble. All insects are in trouble, and it's primarily due to the loss of habitat and the natural plants which they are used to feeding on during their summer period. So this has reached the news in Science magazine, National Geographic, I believe Time magazine even had an article on this also. We often forget about the importance of insects because sometimes those insects harm us, mosquitoes and others. But we have to recall that they are an important part of the food web. Here we have our plant, here we have all the insects which are relating and feeding on this plant, and of course they contribute to the higher trophic levels in our food web. Even the mosquitoes eaten by dragonflies and bats and things of that nature. So to illustrate that, 96% of all tropical birds feed their young larval stages or adult insects. And so without those insects, you're not going to have a lot of nesting birds in your yard. The second thing is that they're very important in relation to our crops. And it's estimated that pollinators provide 1 to 3 bites of food that we eat. Of course, they all are involved in this in one way or another. Excuse me. So what are some of the essentials to help the monarch butterfly? Well, first of all, we have to have caterpillar food. So the female monarch lays her eggs on milkweed, and it's the only plant that she will lay her eggs on. And there are a variety of reasons for that that I don't really have time to go into this morning, but milkweed is the only one. And milkweed is one of the native plants in Michigan. Here we can see a larval stage of the milkweed, of the monarch, chomping down on milkweed leaves. The adults need nectar plants. So once they reach the adult stage, they need nectar plants, and a lot of them. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the common milkweed, which is the milkweed which is common to Michigan, and that is the common milkweed, the butterfly weed, and the swamp milkweed. There are other varieties, whorl, spiral, blunt, but these are the dominant ones that we normally associate with the feeding of the monarch. In considering considering nectar plants, we have to make sure that we have plenty of nectar plants very early in the season and very late in the season. Those early plants are particularly critical to that first entry of the generation up into the summer period, and the mid-range, mid-late, and then finally late. The late is also extremely important because that is the time when that last generation of monarchs is sort of fattening up for the long haul back to its wintering grounds. They cover approximately 2 to 3,000 miles, and it takes between 2 and 3 months to go. So it's also important to have plenty of nectar plants available in the entire flyway for them to nourish themselves on their long journey down into Mexico. As an example of this is a pollinator garden in our yard. This is an early crop. So we see columbine and Penstemon digitalis, and let's see, we see some other. Let's see. Okay, so that's contrasted what we see in the summer with a much greater diversity of flowering plants at that particular time. So important to have a high diversity of nectar plants associated with your plantings. So in 2005, which was one of the years where we really saw a significant decline, Monarch Watch, a national organization, started to plan to establish Monarch Way Stations, a place where they not only could lay their eggs, but also to receive plenty of nectar plants. So the idea was to create, conserve, and to protect monarch habitats, which we've been considerably losing over a period of time. So these are way stations which you can set up in your own yard. You can certify them. The agency also purchase a sign which indicates what you're doing on that particular site. This is an example of a way station which was established down in the Kellogg Forest near Augusta. And this is the second year of planting. You see a rich array or diversity of native plants. This is a new, expanded new planting, as well as this planting down here. This happens to be a nice batch swamp milkweed down here in a little bit more wetter area. As of 2019, there are over 27,000 of way stations across the country. And you can see we have a lot in the western states are large numbers of these. We're in sort of competition right now with Illinois and Texas to see who can have the largest number of way stations associated with the crop. There also is extensive activity up here in eastern southern Ontario, where they too are heavily involved in habitat restoration. So I have a list of resources that you can contact Monarch Watch and other agencies to find out more about what you can do. The other thing that we can do, which is particularly important, is to reduce the use of our pesticides. Pesticides are a real problem for all insects. And this is particular to the neonicotinoids, which are a systemic pesticide. That means that that pesticide actually gets into the plant, remains in the plant for long periods of time. So any insect which is eating the plant, of course, is going to be in trouble. And also there's also the pesticide associated with the nectar and pollen of the plant, which of course the bees, butterflies, etc., are going to be picking up, and of course that will lead to their demise. So when you're buying plants at a local nursery, ask them whether or not they or their suppliers of plants use systemic pesticides, and try to stay away from purchasing these plants which are causing a real problem associated with this. The neonicotinoids are now widely used in agricultural settings where the seed is actually coated with the pesticide, and then that pesticide remains in the crop, in the crop which it is planted. So let's be a hero to the monarch and invite them to lunch and bring back the milkweed seed. So I've included a packet of common milkweed seed in your materials which you picked up at your Cedar Creek, and take an opportunity next year to plant a Monarch Way Station. It doesn't have to be very large. There are some restrictions on what needs to be planted on them, and you can get that information off of Monarch Watch website. So I listed some resources here. First of all, if you'd like to know more about native plants, sources of native plants in the area, you can contact our chapter at info@kalamazoo.wildOnes.org. Monarch Watch is the pivotal organization which drives much of the conservation efforts associated with it, and that along with Monarch Joint Venture. Both of them have considerable downloadable information for you to use, and which is very, very useful information on all pollinators as well as the monarch. There are also a variety of citizen science projects associated with monarchs. One is to monitor the number of eggs and various larval stages in a small patch which you might have in your yard. And that information is put into a national database so that we can keep track of the recruitment of monarchs into the total population. The other is Journey North, which you can participate in that by recording the number of monarchs that are sighted in your area, and then record that to the Journey Watch organization. There also is considerable curriculum information for classrooms, and that also can be found in Monarch University of Minnesota. So those are important considerations, and when you think of the general decline in insects, one sure way of detecting that decline is not only from our own observations, but the number of insects which you find on your windshield as you're driving through the countryside during the summer period. And if you're like we are, we certainly see less and less insects that we are that end up on our windshield or in front of our radiator. So thank you for listening, and I'll turn this back over to Ellen.
Thank you, Mike. I know I learned a lot. I did put those resources also in the comments on Facebook Live. So if you see lots of things popping up on Facebook Live, all those different things that are popping up are all of those different resources that Mike just talked about. So we do have time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, or excuse me, not the chat, in the comments on Facebook Live. I do want to share though for a second, I do have a monarch, not alive unfortunately, with me today. So this is one that accidentally got caught in some netting in somebody's garden that I know. But a cool thing to look for when you're looking for monarchs, you need to look for that kind of waviness in the wings at the bottom. Let's see if you can see it a little bit. I'm gonna move that wing a little bit here. That bottom wing needs to have a waviness on the bottom. If you can kind of see that little loop-de-loo. If it's straight across, it's not a monarch. That would be one of our ones that look a little bit like our monarchs, but our viceroys. That's a different type of butterfly. They don't need those milkweeds like our monarchs do. Karen says the amount of insects on the windshield has really declined. Good indicator, Mike. So she really liked that indicator. I do have a question for you, Mike. Is there anything else that you know that eats milkweed and uses them as a defense, just like the monarchs do? Do you know that?
Pardon, I didn't hear that.
I apologize. Is there anything else that eats milkweed? I know monarchs eat milkweed and uses the stuff in it as a defense against other animals. Is there anything else that does eat the milkweed?
There are quite a number of insects, and there are several books out on the milkweed patch, and there are a number of T-shirts out with illustration of the numbers of the insects that actually go. Some of them actually are seed eaters, so they actually get in the pod containing the seeds and eat some of those seeds. There also are a large number of predators that prey on especially the egg of the monarchs early in the season. So that is a major mortality rate, mortality of the insects. So about 95% of the first, the early hatchlings of the eggs of the monarch are actually killed by predators or other parasites that go after the monarch. So the more we can, the more eggs that can be laid, the better off we are, because we're going to maintain our populations.
Very cool. Mike, there is a question that's coming in from Facebook. Sarah asks, when getting started with the Monarch Way Station, how big of an area do you need to plant?
Well, they can be quite small in that the requirement is you need at least 10 stems of milkweed of various species. And then you need a diversity of nectar plants, which fall into the categories of early, mid, and late. So we could probably establish a way station for as few of maybe 50 plants. 50 plants or less would make a nice monarch station. And you can also add to it. Once you get started, you'll find that you're attracting a tremendous number of insects, and then the urges to increase them. Around our property, we call them amoeba beds because they continue to grow over as we plant more and more plants in them.
So it can be an addicting project, it sounds like.
Right.
Yes, awesome. Well, I'm going to say thank you, Mike, so much for sharing your knowledge on monarchs and milkweeds. And I know I will be looking for how many bugs are splattered on my windshield as an indicator of how well things are doing, and definitely looking for more and more monarchs. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.